We've taken a towering stack of the most trusted study materials, historical notes, textbook concepts, and distilled them into one cohesive deep dive.
Because the goal is to move past rote memorization.
Right.
We need to understand the why and the how.
Exactly. We are going to crack the code on whether India is truly a federal or a unitary state, and arm you with the constitutional articles, the scholarly debates, and the frameworks you need to ace this in an exam or an interview room.
Because when you understand the underlying engineering of the Constitution, those specific rules and exceptions stop looking like random facts.
Right.
They start looking like logical solutions to complex historical problems.
I love that. But before we put India under the microscope, we kind of have to establish a baseline. Like, we need to define what federal actually means on a global stage.
That's a great point. It sets up that paradox we mentioned earlier. And the origin of the concept is really the best place to start.
Okay, lay it on us.
So the word federation comes from the Latin word fidus, which literally translates to treaty or agreement.
An agreement. Okay.
All right. Historically, a federation is a brand new state formed by a voluntary agreement among independent pre-existing units.
And globally, there are like two main routes to getting there, right? You have the coming together model and the holding together model.
Exactly. The classic example of the coming together model is the United States. You originally had 13 independent, highly autonomous colonies.
Right, the original 13.
Yeah. And they recognized their individual vulnerability, so they voluntarily united to form a new, larger nation. Because they started as independent sovereign entities, the resulting states retained massive structural power.
Oh, definitely.
They even get perfectly equal representation in their upper house, the Senate, regardless of whether a state has 1 million people or 40 million people.
Okay, let's unpack this with a metaphor. Coming together is basically like independent adults signing a shared lease on an apartment.
I like that.
Right, like they all have their own lives, their own income streams, but they agree to pool some resources to pay for a bigger place. They are absolute equals in the arrangement.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
But then you have the holding together model, which is what Canada uses, and what India largely adapted. To me, holding together is more like a parent giving their teenagers a generous monthly allowance.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, the teenagers have autonomy, they can buy what they want, decorate their rooms how they want, but the parent still controls the main family bank account and sets the ultimate curfew. Power is devolved downward from a strong center.
That allowance metaphor captures the power dynamic perfectly. The balance of power inherently tilts toward the center in a holding together federation.
Makes sense.
And India looked very closely at the Canadian model. The framers liked the idea of a strong center. They borrowed the term union. And they liked the idea of centrally appointed governors, keeping an eye on things. And crucially, they adopted the idea that any leftover or residuary powers rest with the central government, not the regional ones.
Which brings us to the big exam takeaway and the paradox we promised. If you pull up a digital copy of the Indian Constitution right now and hit Control F to search for the word federation,
you will get 0 results.
0. Not once in the lengthiest constitution in the world is the country called a federation. Instead, Article 1 described India as a union of states.
And what's fascinating here is that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of the Constitution, specifically defended that phrasing for 2 very clear, highly testable reasons.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, he wanted to make it explicitly clear that the Indian Federation is not the result of an agreement among the states.
Wait, so the states didn't get together and create India?
Exactly. The central idea of India already existed, and it created the states purely for administrative convenience.
So back to the metaphor. The parent creating the allowance, not the roommates signing the lease.
Spot on. And the second reason Dr. Ambedkar gave is that no state has the right to secede from the federation.
So they can't just leave?
No, a state cannot vote to simply leave the country. The federation is a union because it is legally indestructible. The bonds are permanent.
Okay, but if the word federation isn't in the document and the states have absolutely no right to leave, why is this a massive chapter in every exam syllabus?
That's a fair question.
Like, what actually makes India federal at all, rather than just a massive unitary empire managed from New Delhi?
Well, because despite those strong centralizing intentions, the core architectural framework of the country meets the defining criteria of a federal system. Political scientists look for certain genuine marks or badges of federalism.
Badges, okay.
Yeah, and the Indian Constitution clearly displays 7 distinct federal features that establish and protect 2 real levels of government.
Let's rattle through how these badges actually operate in practice to keep the pace brisk. The first is dual polity. You literally have 2 governments operating simultaneously, right?
Right. The union government at the center deals with macro, national issues like defense, foreign affairs, currency. Meanwhile, the state governments handle localized matters like agriculture, public health, local police.
But for dual polity to work without total chaos, you need the second badge, a written constitution.
You absolutely need a physical rule book to delineate those boundaries so the 2 levels of government aren't constantly tripping over each other.
And India takes this to the extreme, right?
Oh, definitely. It is the lengthiest written constitution in the world because it painstakingly spells out the structure, organization, and precise powers of both the center and the states down to the finest administrative details.
Wow. And the third badge is the supremacy of that constitution. Like every single law passed, whether in Parliament in New Delhi or a state assembly in Kerala, has to conform to that document.
Exactly. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not the politicians. And to protect that supremacy from being tampered with, you need the 4th feature, a rigid constitution.
Rigid meaning hard to change.
Right. In a federal sense, it means that the rules of the game between the center and the states cannot be changed by the center acting alone.
Oh, that's a big deal.
It is. If Parliament wants to amend the federal structure, they need a special majority in both houses. Plus, they must get the formal approval of at least half of the state legislatures. It places a lock on the core federal mechanics.
Okay, so if there is a dispute over those rules, you need an umpire, which is the 5th badge, an independent judiciary.
Yes, the Supreme Court sits at the apex. If there's a turf war between the center and the state over who gets to tax an industry, the Supreme Court settles it.
Right, they enforce the boundaries. The 6th feature is bicameralism, having 2 houses in the national parliament.
Right, the Lok Sabha represents the people directly, but the Rajya Sabha specifically represents the states, gives them a voice.
But then there is the 7th badge, which I know is a massive target for examiners, the division of powers, specifically laid out in the 7th schedule.
The 7th schedule is the operational engine of Indian federalism. It's the actual list of who gets to make laws about what.
And it divides power into 3 buckets, right?
Yes. You have the union list, which has roughly 100 subjects that only the central parliament can touch. Then the state list, with about 61 subjects exclusively for the state legislatures.
And the third?
The concurrent list, with roughly 52 subjects where both the center and the states have the authority to make laws.
Hold on, I need to interrupt this explanation because you're making this sound like a perfectly balanced scale, but let's look at the actual math here.
Okay, let's look at it.
New Delhi gets 100 subjects, and they are the heavy hitters: defense, atomic energy, banking, interstate trade. The states only get 61, mostly local management stuff. Plus, if both the center and a state make a law on the concurrent list and they clash, the center's law automatically overrides the state's law. And earlier we said the center gets all the residuary powers.
Under Article 248, yes.
Right. So anything new, like artificial intelligence or cyber laws, automatically defaults to New Delhi. This doesn't sound like equal roommates at all. It sounds like the center holds every single trump card.
You have zeroed in on the exact illusion the framers created. What you were describing is the transition into the next major conceptual framework you must understand for any competitive exam.
So my suspicion is right.
Absolutely. Those 7 badges absolutely establish a federal structure on the surface. But underneath, the system is engineered with heavily centralized unitary features.
So it's a federal structure wrapped around a unitary spine.
Exactly. Let's look at how New Delhi actually keeps the states on a tight leash through 10 major constitutional plot twists.
10. Wow. Let's start with territorial vulnerability because this completely shatters the American comparison for me. In the US, the map is locked.
Right. American states are geographically indestructible.
But in India, under Article 3, states are not. Parliament alone, meaning the central government, can alter a state's area, chop it in half, change its boundaries, or even erase its name entirely.
They are required to ask the state's opinion, but they're not required to actually listen to it. The state's very existence relies on the geographic whims of the center.
That is wild.
And that vulnerability is just the beginning. The next mechanisms are all about enforcing legal and administrative uniformity across the entire country, completely bypassing state autonomy.
Give me an example.
Take the single constitution. American states have their own state constitutions detailing their specific regional governance. Indian states have no such power. One single document binds the entire subcontinent.
But then you have single citizenship. Like, there is no separate legal citizenship for living in Maharashtra versus living in Tamil Nadu.
Exactly. Mechanically, this prevents states from creating locals-only legal silos. You carry identical fundamental rights across every state border.
The same logic applies to the integrated judiciary, right? We don't have separate federal courts for central laws and state courts for state laws.
Right. It is one continuous single chain of courts from the lower district levels up through the high courts and finally the Supreme Court. A state high court judge is appointed by the central authorities, not the state government.
That brings us to a massive concept for UPSC aspirants, the All India Services, the IAS, the IPS, the Indian Forest Service.
Mechanically, this is brilliant central control.
Yeah, because these officers serve the state governments, right? They run the districts and occupy the highest executive posts in the state secretariats.
But they are recruited, trained, and ultimately controlled by the center. A chief minister can transfer an IAS officer, but they cannot fire them. The center acts as the ultimate boss of the state's own administrative machinery.
It installs a central nerve system directly inside the state body, and we see the exact same thing in state finances and elections.
Yes. The Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, audits the accounts of the states, but the CAG is appointed solely by the president.
And the Election Commission conducts state elections, but the commissioners are chosen by the center. The states have no independent machinery for their own audits or elections.
And if a state legislature still manages to pass a law this center doesn't like, there is an executive override mechanism built right into the state capital. The governor.
Right, the governor. They are the constitutional head of the state, but appointed by the president. They act as the center's eyes and ears.
And they hold a specific veto power. If the state passes a bill that threatens central interests, the governor can simply reserve that bill for the president's consideration.
That effectively hands the central government a veto over laws passed by a democratically elected state assembly.
It does. But all of these features pale in comparison to the ultimate trump card, the mechanism that completely overrides the federal structure entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The emergency provisions.
Yes. Under Articles 352, 356, and 360, when a national, state, or financial emergency is declared, the federal distribution of power is legally suspended.
Wait, totally suspended?
Yes. The central government assumes direct control over the legislative and executive powers of the states.
Returning to our earlier metaphor, the parent doesn't just reduce the teenager's allowance. They completely freeze the bank account, take away the car keys, and assume total control of the teenager's schedule.
Exactly. And the brilliance of this constitutional design is that the system seamlessly shifts from a federal setup into a purely unitary structure without needing to pass a single constitutional amendment.
But why? Why build this massive unitary spine?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to put yourself in their shoes in the late 1940s. The country was experiencing the unimaginable violence and massive displacement of partition.
Right, it was an incredibly unstable time.
They were looking at a fractured map dotted with over 500 independent princely states that needed to be integrated into a single nation. They faced aggressive secessionist tendencies, communal riots, and crushing economic disparity.
They literally couldn't afford weak central control.
Exactly. They fundamentally believed that a weak central government would lead to the balkanization of the subcontinent. A dominating center wasn't just a power grab. It was viewed as an existential necessity to ensure national stability and survival.
Wow. So we have this incredible duality. A federal structure designed to accommodate the sheer size and linguistic diversity of India, heavily restricted by a unitary spine designed to hold it all together by force if necessary.
That's the core tension.
So what does this all mean for the exam? How do the scholars actually label this beast? When you're writing an answer, you can't just list features, you have to quote the scholars.
Right. You need to view these scholar quotes not just as names to memorize, but as a philosophical debate over how the system actually functions.
Okay, let's run through the scorecard. What about Casey Ware?
The most famous and perhaps most pessimistic assessment. He famously labeled India as quasi-federal.
Quasi-federal, kind of dismissive.
In his view, the centralizing features were so overwhelming that India was actually a unitary state with subsidiary federal features, essentially a fake federation.
Okay, but then you have Granville Austin. He looked at the exact same constitutional document, And came to a much more optimistic conclusion.
Yes, he coined the term cooperative federalism.
Oh.
Austin argued that having a strong center does not automatically mean the states are weak or irrelevant.
They just have to work together.
Exactly. The Constitution forces them to function interdependently. Neither can survive without the other, so they must act as partners.
And Ivor Jennings?
He took a more literal approach, characterizing it as a federation with a strong centralizing tendency, simply describing the mechanical reality.
That's a safe bet. And finally, Morris Jones.
He introduced the concept of bargaining federalism, highlighting that regardless of what the Constitution says on paper, the day-to-day reality involves constant political negotiation, haggling, and deal-making between New Delhi and the state capitals.
Okay, so for your exams, you need to bring these academic terms into the real world. What does cooperative federalism look like mechanically today?
It looks like shared platforms. For example, the Interstate Council or the Zonal Councils, where neighboring states sit down to resolve regional disputes over things like infrastructure.
Or take NTI-IOG. It's not just a government think tank. It acts as a literal marketplace where state leaders sit at the table with central ministers to negotiate national development policies together.
And the clearest mechanical example of cooperative federalism recently is the GST Council.
Oh, right. Taxes.
Taxation was historically heavily divided, but the goods and services tax required a unified system. In the GST Council, the center and the states literally vote together to decide indirect tax rates.
Using the metaphor again, the parent and the teenager finally opened a joint checking account where both signatures are required to make major withdrawals.
Exactly.
But alongside cooperation, modern India has seen the massive rise of competitive federalism.
Yes, where states actively compete against each other to attract private investment, foreign factories, and tech jobs.
Right. They compete to strip away red tape and improve their ease of doing business metrics. They vie for higher rankings on Niti Aayog's performance indices for health outcomes or water management, knowing that higher rankings bring more investment.
The underlying theory is that this ruthless competition forces better governance at the state level.
But if we need the ultimate real-world case study to drop into an essay to prove we understand how this entire holding together system works in practice,
you have to look at the geography of Andhra Pradesh. It is federalism in living action.
Oh, tell me about it.
Back in 1953, following massive regional protests, it became India's very first linguistic state. The center accommodated the regional identity.
And then, decades later, the exact same state became the prime example of Article 3 in action. In 2014, the new state of Telangana was carved directly out of Andhra Pradesh.
Right. Both of those massive territorial reorganizations, creating a state and then splitting it in half, were executed by the central parliament.
The center completely redrew the map of the region. It perfectly illustrates that the regions hold deep political identity, but the ultimate architectural control rests firmly in New Delhi.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis for your exam preparation. If you take only one golden rule into the exam hall regarding the Indian federal system, let it be this.
Wait for it.
India is federal in structure, but unitary in spirit. It operates as a typical federation during normal times, balancing national needs with regional identities. But it is uniquely, deliberately engineered to transform into a powerful unitary state during emergencies.
It is a system built entirely for flexibility and survival.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to chew on for your essay papers or an interview panel. We just broke down competitive federalism, where states are constantly racing against each other for private investments and top Niti Aayog rankings. But if states are locked in an endless economic race, what happens to the regions that consistently lose that race? The states burdened with historical disadvantages, geographical hurdles, or lower literacy rates.
That's the big question.
If the investment always flows to the winning states, does holding together a federation risk straining its own bonds when the economic realities between the rich states and the poor states become too drastically different? Can a strong center hold together a deeply unequal union?
That is the exact type of analytical framing that separates top-tier candidates from everyone else. It shows you understand the mechanics, not just the definitions.
Well, you started this deep dive staring at a mountain of syllabus material, feeling like you were looking at an impenetrable block of granite. But hopefully, you now see the blueprints underneath. You understand not just where the constitutional walls are built, but the historical and mechanical reasons why the architects built them that way. Keep breaking down those mechanisms, best of luck with your exams, and above all, keep questioning how the world around you actually works.